This presentation was interesting just because I feel that I may come off a little bit biased, and I try to best use my unbiased assessment when doing this presentation. Um, Obviously, with me being a black man and much of this text being regarding the African American identity, there are certain bias that I'm trying to stay away from that kind of influence how I feel about it. And regarding to the first question regarding my reactions, it actually doesn't surprise me in terms of the perceptions of crime and deviance within the media. I see it all the time. I've lived it. I've been in situations where I haven't been doing anything wrong, but simply my skin color or maybe the way that I sound, or maybe my size, or whatever the case may be, is maybe comes off a little bit threatening to other races. Whereas somebody else of another race that may be even within my own circle, they may not look at them a certain way. They can get away with certain actions that I can't get away with, and I have to make sure that I'm cognizant of that at all times, as unfair as it is. So I wasn't surprised about it at all. In terms of the second question, I do believe that mass media creates unwarranted levels of crime and fear in our society. Unfortunately, and I hate to say that's just the way it is, but it is just the way it is. Specifically in the article regarding construction of a crack mother icon, I found it interesting when they referenced the movie Boys in the Hood. It's one of my favorite movies. It's a good pastime of mine. But in looking at it from this perspective, I do find it interesting how Doughboy, the character played by Ice Cube, literally just finished selling crack to somebody. And then the girl came up who was dubbed as a crackhead, came up, and he didn't want to sell her at all. There actually wasn't a great representation of a typical mother or basically a mother in that film. And a lot of that goes back to just how women are depicted in our society, specifically in African American society. I think that it's important that roles such as Claire Huxtable in The Cosby Show played, and the fact that she was in the position that she was, being a lawyer on that show, and she raised a great family. I think it's important. People like Aunt Vivian in The Fresh Prince of Bel-Air, for us to see good women role models as well, and not always depicted as the loud black woman or one that is the single mother and things like that. So whatever the reasons are for that happening, I'm not sure. In terms of the third question, how do perceptions of crime reinforce the labels in society? The thing that probably stuck out to me the most in this presentation was in the article of cult cultivation. In terms of talking about the content differences between genres, I never really kind of thought about the fact that African American men, as it's quoted here, African American men dominate as violent criminals on TV news. Every time you watch the news, and I try not to watch the news as much as possible, but whenever I watch the news, you normally see a story about a gang fight. You normally see a story about some type of, anything regarding weapons that have to do with people of color. But yet it's on fictional TV, and it's bombarded, and we're reminded that it's fictional TV, in which we see the white male as normally the violent crime, but that kind of gets pushed to the wayside because we understand that it's just TV. So it doesn't take as much, value, or we don't take it to heart in terms of how we view it in society. And the fourth question, in terms of what are the most important ideas from this, I think the most important ideas come from just the influence of what we're exposed to. I really like to examine the idea about the further away that we are from identifying with something that we see, the more likely we are to have a negative connotation towards it. For example, in the influence of exposure and depictions, they talk about how a white woman is two subcategories away from a black male. She's not a male, and then she's also not African American. So if she sees any crime that is done by a black male, she's more likely to have a further negative connotation on that as would, say, a white male. he has only one subcategory away, or another black male, which is probably more likely to self-identify and feel sympathetic for that person in the text. I think that the biggest theoretical perspective in this entire, in terms of mass media and the social perceptions of it, has to do with the conflict theory. And within the conflict theory, what it talks about is that the underprivileged and crimes committed by the wealthy and powerful normally go unpunished in comparison to their counterparts of those that are underprivileged. We see this all the time, and those that can afford good representation in terms of like with an attorney can normally get out of a sticky situation, and then those that don't have the money can't. And generally, unfortunately, it falls under what your race is or what your social economical background is. And because of that, the fact that we have a lot more minorities in terms of race that are on the lower end of the spectrum from a financial standpoint in this country, the depictions of how many crimes and how many criminals that we have do look unfavorable to the minorities as opposed to maybe their white counterparts who are generally more affluent just from a country statistical standpoint. So I think in the fact that economic factors and social factors always are a cause of crime and deviance, I think that the conflict theory is definitely the biggest perspective in this project. Thanks.